Cool. So today is episode 9 of Sonic Alchemy's Scent Talks, where I talk about my work and everything else. Um, this is the second last episode. I'm really excited for it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm going to get straight into it today. I'm sure by now you guys are familiar with who I am. I'm Clancy, and I'm the perfumer and an artistic brain behind Sonic Alchemy. And so today I have a very exciting episode that I'm going to jump straight into, where I'm going to talk about a scent that I made very specially for a friend of mine. And I thought it would be good to do it because it's the most recent thing I've worked on. And there's always a real advantage in talking about things that are right on the top of your tongue and that are fresh in your mind. So, like I always do, I'm going to start today's episode off with a reading. And this is a very exciting one. I'm reading today from Perfume, A Century of Scents. And it sort of talks about, obviously, the entire sort of history of the 20th century in perfume, and it breaks it down into different scents. I like these little readings that I do at the start of every episode because I try and read from as many of the different books about perfume that I have, and I have sort of between 20 and 30 different books on perfume, so there's a lot to choose from. And today I have chosen a particular passage from this book called, that is about a perfume called Chypre de Coty, which, if I hold this up here, you shall see. So I'll talk a bit about what this means afterwards, but I'm going to read this little passage because I haven't read it since I read this book many years ago. So I thought that would be a good idea. So here is this bit about Chypre de Coty. The classical perfume. Coty's Chypre is another release dating from the Great War. According to the perfume house itself, and received understanding, but for such a famous perfume, Chypre isn't half mirrored in fog. The year attributed to this entry is a fiction. What seems to have happened according to pharmacy advertisements of the time is that as early as 1909, Chypre, perhaps the same blend as the one for which Coty is known, perhaps not, was introduced to outlets in the United States. It then seems to have disappeared around 1913, only to pop up again towards the end of the decade. It could therefore be argued that the Chypre really belongs to the previous decade of our century of scents. It is a tricky one, and one for the perils of trying to date a fragrance with exactitude, but for now, here it stays. Chypre was a much less tempestuous scent than the likes of Les Fruits Défendus or Narcissus Noir. In its greenness, it was cooler and self-possessed. No tantrums here. The generic term Chypre was already a long-standing convention within fragrance, drawing on an ancient tradition of perfume making in the Mediterranean island of Cyprus, which is Chypre in French. This gateway between East and West was famous for aromatics such as the beautifully sticky labdanum, a dark resin taken from the leaves and twigs of the rock rose, so gummy it would stick to the beards of grazing goats. Over the time, the name Chypre became almost a stamp of approval, as well as a loosely identifiable style. Powdered Chypres containing moss with animalics, such as musk or ambergris, were fashionable alongside vanilla and millefleurs in the 18th century, favoured for being incredibly long-lasting. What Coty did was to take the core aspects of the Chypre, which had been underexploited, and gave it a revamp, one so successful that this perfume is now seen as the first of its kind. It is always annoying when a perfume gets discontinued, and especially so for Chypre, because it was a reference point for so many other 20th century fragrances. And Coty had already given Rose a glossy facelift through La Rose Jacqueminot, got everyone excited about amber with Ambre Antique, and taken Orientals to new heights with La Origine. Now they offered a bewitching fragrance at once floral, mossy, and balsamic, with a Moorish bergamot opening, herbal, citric, and dry. Coty themselves described the scent as amber froth emanating at certain hours from the woods and the forests. Chypre, with its now distinctive trio of bergamot, labdanum, and oak moss, was like a patch of Gerouge, I'm not sure what that means, wild Mediterranean scrubland, given a once over with the topiary shears to become the last word in chic. They could have really gone for it with the cell. Cyprus was, after all, the birthplace of Aphrodite. So there was plenty of material for an overblown representation, but restraint prevailed. There was a hint of the classical association in the subdued sage green paper covering the perfume box, which depicted Coty's signature motif of classical nude figures crouching over fragrant embers and wafting the vapors towards their faces. Coty did not tend to appropriate other contemporary cultural reference points, unlike Guerlain, but this perfume occupies the same realm as Isadora Duncan dancing barefoot in a Grecian robe designed by Paul Poiret, or Nijinsky's fawn in the ballet Russe's L'après-midi d'une faune, having a wonderful time in the forest, frolicking with nymphs. So, that is that one. There's a lot that was covered there. I think the sort of important takeaway from this bit is about how there is in perfume, much like how there is in music and painting, there are genres and styles of perfumes, and some like to call them archetypes of perfumes. And Chypre is essentially one of them. It's a pattern and a form of creating perfume, I suppose. And it is with the opening of that passage that I just read from that I sort of wanted to flow into the rest of my talk, which is about a perfume that I just made called the Obsolete Chypre. And I am quite excited to talk about that one as well. But before I do, I have a smell and tell. And as anyone who has seen any of my other videos is well acquainted with, smell and tell is where I bring a scent that I use in perfume and I talk about it in smell. So this one is super, super special and is rare and might be hard for people to place because it's not a big thing in perfume. This week's oil is an essential oil that is called Fire Tree Essential Oil. And this comes from the Xanthoria presi. Lots of hard words to say in my talk today. And so this comes from what's sometimes referred to as the grass tree or the flame tree. And this particular shrub is native to Australia. You see them in many different places. They have the kind of stocky little kind of funny looking base root, then with lots of outgrowing green sort of grassy bits, and when they flower they shoot up a massive kind of pole looking thing where the flower is on the top. This particular kind of grass tree grows in Western Australia, essentially. And so I have recently purchased what I believe to be is the last amount of this oil in the world. They've stopped producing it because the manufacturer shut down. So I have a little bit on the end of this strip. I haven't diluted this down. This is it as a pure ingredient, um, and it's so strange and interesting because it has all of these balsamic, um, dark tones that kind of combine with this leather quality. I get a lot of leather. There's an ingredient also called Tulu balsam, which sort of reminds me of this a little bit, but not quite. It's quite a dirty, earthy smell. It has all of these different facets, and it's really long lasting. Um, if you ever go on a bushwalk and you see any of these trees, you can go up and have a smell if part of the tree is sort of been broken off or bruised. And you'll get a little bit of a hint of this, but it's quite subtle. Um, yeah, it's quite a dry scent. You really smell the sort of kind of the soil of a drought ridden woodland, I suppose. It has that kind of really interesting dark bitter quality. It's so interesting. So I'm working on a perfume at the moment that has this in it, and I won't be talking about that today, but nevertheless, very interesting. So that's my smell and tell. So the Obsolete Chypre is a perfume that I made for someone who commissioned a little perfume. At the moment, as a result or as a response to the COVID crisis, I offer these $100 small commissions, which are very different from my the big commissions that take a lot longer. Sometimes they take a year, for example, to do some of those commissions. And my friend approached me about making a perfume for a zine that he was creating called Highly Contagious, which I think will be in print in the next couple of months. And he sent over two musicians that the zine was featuring. The first is called Laurel Meets the Obsolete, which is where part of the name the Obsolete Chypre comes in, and another musician called Ami Dang. And so I spent a lovely time last week listening to probably 10 albums, um, which was a lot of fun, kind of sifting through, because I came up with the idea of taking two songs, one from each musician, and blending them together and creating this set as like this coupling, I think. So what I'm going to do first is play both songs. So the first song that I played is called Treasure. It's by Ami Dang, who is she's an Indian musician who plays sorts of, who's I think a sitar player from what I can tell. This song called Treasure is the heart note of the perfume. So when I pick a song or when I pick a collection of songs to make a perfume out of, the usual way is that either elements of the song or the song as a whole, like there'll be one part making this, there'll be one part of the song for this part of the scent, or there'll be, in this case, I'll have a song that is the heart note, another song that is the bass note, for example. So I'll play this little bit from Treasure. So this is the heart note song. Cool. So I'll just play that little bit, and I'm going to link these two songs in the comments later on. If you can hear my cat in the background, I'm really sorry. I tried to feed her before doing this talk so that she wouldn't do this, but she has, unfortunately, she's very, she needs a lot of attention. So, anyway, the next song is a song by Laurel Meets the Obsolete, which are a psychedelic rock band from Mexico. And I picked a song by them called Lux Lumina. Lux meaning light in Latin, and Lumina meaning light in Romanian, I think. So this song is the bass note or the deep note of the perfume, just so that you guys know where I've placed these as you're listening. So I'll just play a section of this song. Skip forward a bit. Okay, I'll leave that there. So that those are the two songs that the perfume is based on. Um, and what I'm going to do first is show you. So before I begin a perfume or a project like this, I'll usually spend quite a lot of time making the mind map. Most people are pretty familiar with mind maps. So I'm going to show you the mind map that I created for this scent. And what I've essentially done here is put sort of, if you can see, I'll put it up to the, yeah, cool. I've sort of put on either side here, here's the first song that we heard, that Indian song called Treasure, and then I've put a whole bunch of describing words, sort of like far away, female vocal, powerful, drive, drums, um, sparse and trance, Hindu, warmth, that kind of thing. And then on the other side, where this Lux Lumina song that we just heard was, hopefully you guys can see this, I've put that song title and then done the same. And for that one, I used words like rough, scary, fear, horror, eerie, weird, distortion, dirty, tension. There's a lot of interesting words, and so I'm building up that sort of associative web in my brain before I even smell anything or before I pick up a pipette. So it ends up being this kind of this way of taking all this internal emotion and information and structuring it out into something where I see, okay, I have two themes here, the first song and the second song playing off each other. Let's build on that. So I'm glad I showed you that, because I don't know if I've showed a mind map that I've just made to anyone before. And it's a good way of understanding sort of the mental image of a perfume before it's made, maybe. So it's quite interesting. So I'm going to start with talking about the heart note, which is the kind of the core of the perfume that I made. It was the first thing I made. So this contains, I'm just grabbing a scent strip because I'm going to smell the heart note and explain it. I was sort of, when I was working on this, I picked that song, the first song, Treasure, out of everything else that the artist had made, based on the fact that it was quite structurally clear, and I felt like I could pick up on a lot of elements really quickly, rather than it being confused and sort of difficult to decipher. So this is the heart note that I made. On the label, all my little bottles have a little label on them. This just says the name of the zine, Highly Contagious, and then Heart version 2. So I've got it on a little strip for you because I thought it would be better to show it rather than tell it. And it has this amazing sort of combination of clove, cinnamon, pimento berry from Jamaica, and then quite a bit of black pepper as well, because I knew that I was going to need to start with the pepper, with the spice ideas, and then build sort of through it. So you get, when you combine a number of spices like that together, you get this really interesting kind of intense, warm, sort of smoke idea that's very, very, it's just incredibly emotional as well. And I tend to use it. A few years ago, I built a scent called India that I used in my live musical performances that had a sort of similar thing. Wasn't quite as sort of refined as this, but it was a similar idea. And then sort of, I'll show you guys as well. This is the actual working formula, I suppose. It's very chaotic, but that's sort of really everything about the scent there. And so for the heart note, I have, as well as those spice elements that I'd already mentioned, I used some pure jasmine oil, which works really well with the spices. And then I used another oil called tuberose absolute. And this oil particularly, this tuberose oil comes from India, and it has this incredible intensity. It sort of smells, it has these kind of curvaceous white, called lactone elements, which are kind of creamy and dairy-like, but at the same time being really vicious, like really intense. And so I actually ended up diluting that down to 10% and then using that in just a little bit of it. As a result, you get this kind of vibration, a kind of shimmering in between the spices and the what's called the narcotic floral elements. It's really big and robust. It's a bit of a, it holds no punches, and so it has this sweetness and this dryness and this power behind it that I got from listening to the sitar song, which was just so interesting as well, to sort of pair those things together. So that heart note element, that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different parts to it, for example. Spices and the flowers that I mentioned already. So I had that and I went, cool, this is really interesting. So then I moved on to the Lux Lumina song, the rock song that we listened to together just before. And I knew that it was going to need to be something more, I picked up, I don't know if you guys heard this, I'll recommend listening back to this song, but there's a main, I guess, chunk, the heart of that song is, sort of sounds like a windswept horror film, or like a dust storm, or something really, really intense like that. It's quite frightening. There's a lot of screaming, but I was really shocked when I listened to it. It was really interesting. And so I knew for a fact that whenever I approach something that's kind of scary or horror-like, I'm going to have to use notes that are potentially a little bit dirty or disgusting, meaning things that smell animalic. Animalic just means animal smells, or things that smell like your body, things that smell dirty and kind of gross. And so do I have it here? Yeah. So I have here the little bass note that I made, to kind of act as like a counterpart to that first floral spice idea that I made. Um, and this has been on the strip. So what I do is I like to dip these scent strips when I'm working on something. I will dip them in the thing that I'm working on, and then I'll leave them for a couple days on the scent strip, put them out on my dining table, and I'll come back to them. And particularly when it's something like this bass note that's really dark, got a lot going on, that's very heavy, you need to wait and see over time how things change. Because if you judge it immediately, you're going to get a really confusing image of what you're working on, and you're likely to misjudge it. So this has been on the strip for 3 days, and what I've used in this particular part is quite amazingly fun. I really enjoyed this little bit because I was really struck by how kind of horrifying that section of the song is, and so I built built kind of what I would consider to be a semi-classical Chypre, as I was talking about at the start of this, a kind of Chypre bass note. So that meant adding a lot of moss, a lot of oak moss, which has this beautiful black kind of green smell to it. Kind of smells of mushrooms and dirt and water. Oak moss to me as well. So some of the oak moss in the world comes from Yugoslavia, and some of it comes from Morocco. Uh, in my opinion, that's where most of it comes from. And it is such an amazingly interesting ingredient because there's this kind of myth or folklore that inside the smell of the oak moss is the scent of the ancient dead oceans that were once a part of where, that once took up most of the space of the land of the earth that we now live on. And it has that kind of scent to it. It's very interesting. Um, and then I used something called vetiver oil, again from India. And it was particularly interesting. Vetiver is a root I'm pretty sure in Indian culture they just refer to it as a herb, but you usually would use it in a perfume like this. It has a really intense um, dry kind of scorched earth scent. I've used it in my perfume that I made for the climate change scents for my perfume called Drought. Um, and then I also used a few different scents like patchouli, which is a sort of a green leafy scent that has that real deep decaying autumnal smell, decaying leaves and that kind of undergrowth scent. Um, and then I used a lot of different animalic kind of smells. So I used an ingredient called tonquitone, which has this smell in perfume. I think tonquitone tends to be made, um, or rather used, when we're trying to recreate the smell of natural deer musk, because traditionally Himalayan deer musk came from the male deer native to the Himalayas, and it is obviously incredibly horrifyingly serious animal cruelty going on. And so we use way you can do it is you can use synthetic ingredients to recreate that scent, and that way it's eco-friendly and cruelty-free. And so I use this ingredient called tonquitone with a couple of other musk elements, something called musk concentrate, which if you ever smelt some kind of uh, a makeshift musk oil out in the world before, it has that kind of classic, just sort of laundry detergent-y, clean sheets, a really beautiful, classically masculine musk scent, in my opinion. And and then I used, a few different woody scents. I used something called birch tar, where they collect the wood from the birch tree, and they cook it until it is what's called rectified. So it's essentially cooked till it's brown, and you get this incredible smoky scent. I used birch tar in my bushfire perfume that I made for Smells of a Future Earth earlier in the year, and it was in my Smells of Climate Change one a few years ago. So it has that perfect bushfire scent as well. So combining all this dark, kind of mysterious, kind of gruesome and gritty, really grisly scents, and putting them together to make something that was really dark and earthy, but has this sense of some kind of beast or some kind of creature. Um, Again, you can kind of see how that stuff flows into this idea of like olfactory or scent horror, essentially. And so those were the two pillars of the fragrance. Um, and then to finish it off, in the original Chypre de Coty, the one that I read about in earlier in the talk that was released in 1917, which is also, as a side note, very interesting. A lot of people don't realize that some of these perfumes, like Chanel Number 5, is essentially 100 years old. I think next year it'll be 100 years old. These perfumes are very old, and they are miraculous because they have somehow withstood the test of time. And in the original Chypre, there is a kind of combination of lemon, bergamot, which is another kind of citrus fruit from southern Italy, I believe orange flower, and yeah, maybe that's about it. I think just those three or four kind of citrusy elements. So I ended up making a simple thing like that, adding it onto the top, but it was really um, more of a gestural thing than anything else, because it's not doesn't play a big part of the perfume, unlike some of my scents where the top note has a particularly intense citrusy quality that I really exaggerate. So then, practically what I have now here is the finished scent that I made over the week, and I'm very proud of it, and I really it's hard to explain. I have worked on scents before that have taken me 3 years to make. I've even heard stories earlier in the 20th century of perfumes that took 15 years to create. And so to make something that was quite interesting and sort of self-contained and really just provocative in less than a week, it was a real achievement for me, and I feel very happy about it. So that's all I have to talk about today, and I don't have this one on sale right now, but if anyone who's watching this wants to buy a small bottle, I can make it up for you, no problem. You just have to contact me, and I can do that for you, no issue. And anyway, have a fantastic week. I'll see you next week for the very last episode. Next week is the 10th episode of these talks. I will be done probably forever after doing the 10th episode. So make sure you tune in next week at 2 o'clock. And thank you so much for watching. Cool. All right, guys. Have a good one.